afternoon. Thank you so much to joining us for putting me on the program. I'm so excited to be here. It was a dream of mine to be here, and it has come true. So I'm enjoying this program, and I want to share with you research on another financial product that we haven't talked about yet, reverse mortgages. And I will tell you what these are in a minute. This is joint work with Professor Hazel Bateman, who attended the workshop in 2019, she says. One of our PhD students is our industry and a postdoc. And we are in Sydney, Australia, and the University of New South Wales. New South Wales is the most populous state of Australia, and it's beautiful. You should come and visit. And also you should come and visit our school. We are the School of Risk and Actuarial Studies, and we think we're the number one school in actuarial studies in the world. So, this project is looking at reverse mortgages. We are researchers interested in retirement financing. And the longer you study retirement financing, you stumble across this big asset that many retiree households own at their home. And that is often underutilized in retirement financial planning. And so what we do in this paper is we first build a model to assess whether reverse mortgages should be part of a retirement financial strategy, and we're not the first to do this. Many other good people have done this before, but we do this for the Australian context and the specific Australian pension system and institutional setting. And the model suggests that reverse mortgages can give welfare gains to older households. We compare this against market data, see very low take-up of reverse mortgages in Australia, similar to other countries. And then we did a survey asking people about a hypothetical product, and we used information treatments to see if we can overcome some behavior biases around reverse mortgages. And so this is my talk. So I will first give you some background. So this background is from a review that the Australian Treasury did, but you could do a similar review in your countries, and it will come out similar. So what this review of the Australian retirement income system found is that for most households, the family home is the biggest asset. And when you look at the age spectrum, which the upper graph shows you, it's especially for the 65-year-olds, 75, and so on. The green asset is the owner-occupied home. So older Australians were lucky of being able to invest in property when it was still affordable, and they had massive gains in the house prices. And so when you look across the wealth spectrum, confusingly, Treasury changed the colors. Now blue is the home in the lower graph. The home is the biggest share of household assets, especially for the lower wealth quintiles. So more wealthy Australians hold other assets, but what this review found, if you used a bit of this home equity, you would have a new source of retirement funding, and it could substantially increase retirement incomes for Australians with a modest impact on debt. And so motivated by this, we weren't surprised by this, because this is a stylized fact in many countries, that households, the main vehicle of savings is the home. The home is the only asset you can go to a bank and borrow large amounts and say, I want to buy a home. You cannot, if you're 30, go to a bank and borrow $1 million because you want to invest in the stock market. You can only do that for a home. So many countries, home ownership is tax preferred, and although trends of home ownership are in decline, it's still a major form of saving. So in Australia, there's different ways of how older Australians could use their home to draw an income. I want to start with the commercial reverse mortgages. They work in Australia like in many other countries. So in Australia, they are offered by banks and non-bank lenders. It's usually available from age 60, which is 7 years before the Australian age pension age. There is relatively conservative loan-to-value ratios, around 25% at age 60, then going up 1 percentage point per year. You can take a lump sum or income. The clue is the special thing about reverse mortgages. You don't have to make any repayments. So this is a loan that accumulates the interest and over time, and you can choose to make interest or capital payments, but you can defer them to the very end. So this is a product especially designed for older homeowners, it comes with a guarantee that you can remain in your home as long as you wish to, and it comes with a guarantee that only the home is used to settle the debt. So it's called a no negative equity guarantee. You can only ever have to use the sale proceeds to settle the loan. You don't have to put extra wealth into the loan. So we also have a very unique government program in Australia. So this is different from the US tech program. So in the US, there's a reverse mortgage program that is where the Federal Housing Agency supports the insurance that provides this no negative equity guarantee. In Australia, we have a reverse mortgage program directly offered by the government. The same place where you apply for your pension, you can apply for this loan program. It's called Home Equity Access Scheme. It works like a reverse mortgage with lower payments. So you can borrow up to 1.5 times the maximum age pension. So if you're on a full age pension in Australia, you can basically get half of it on top. And you can choose fortnightly payments or lump sums. The interest rates are very attractive in the government scheme, just 4% compared to mortgage rates of 6%. So Australian homeowners, young families that have mortgages currently pay 6%. Older Australians can borrow from the government at 4%. If they want larger loans and more flexibility and take a commercial reverse mortgage, the main provider, the largest provider of reverse mortgages in Australia charges almost 10%. So compared to the talks this morning, I feel more comfortable showing these interest rates. But usually, so they're high. But they are high due to the underlying risks, which are very, like house price risk, interest rate risk, duration risk. So for somebody who loves modeling, like I do, reverse mortgages are great because it's a product full of risks. And we've done a lot of modeling and valuation. So this is a bit more on the government scheme. So the government program has seen a beautiful growth since 2019. So in 2019, this was called the pension loan scheme, and it was available to some veterans. And the government made a push, made several reforms. They say, let's open it to any Australian, let's increase the loan amount, let's cut the interest rate, and then they did a rebranding. So this government scheme was called Pension Loan Scheme, and older Australians feel very successful. They pay down their mortgage, and they don't want to go back into debt. So there's debt aversion. So they, instead of calling it a loan scheme, it's now called the Home Equity Access Scheme. It's a positive rebrand. They further tweaked the scheme. They started to introduce lump sums and no negative equity guarantee. And last year they came out and said that any financial advisor can advise on this without need of a credit license. So you don't really see big changes in the uptake due to these changes, but there's a general trend. The trend is probably due to cost of living. The cost of inflation, after the 2 years of border closures in Australia, we have a massive shortage of labor. So for 2 years, nobody could come in and out of Australia, and it scared people away. So if you need a job, or if you have a family member, come to Australia. We need everybody. But everything is very expensive at the moment, and people, especially the older elderly or older population, the pension is relatively low, the government pension. So this is probably needs-based. Here's a bit about the private market. So there's different providers, and I know most of them because it's a small country, and I'm part of an industry forum that meets and discusses these products. These are the interest rates. They variable rates. They go up and down with the cash rate. It's very hard to find out statistics about the size of this market because it's small, and nobody wants to say how small they are. So I did a lot of detective work. The biggest, so Heartland Bank is a New Zealand provider. They say that they have a market share of 41%, and their mortgage receivables are 1.8 billion. And they say the average loan size is 188,000, which, if you do a bit of envelope calculation, is about, they have probably about 9,500 mortgages, reverse mortgages, which makes the total market maybe 23,000, which makes it 0.4% of Australian homeowners, of Australians aged 60 plus. So it's less than 1% of the population has these products. And this 13,000 in the government program. So overall, these programs are available, but maybe like only 1 or 2% of all the population are using these products. So what does the literature say about this? And many smart, yeah?
Sorry, quick question. So both these programs, when you participate, you get one lump sum payment. Is that correct?
No, you have choices. So in the government program, the default is fortnightly payments. But you can select to lump some of your fortnightly payments together in one advance lump sum. With the private market, you have all your choices. You can. So what typically happens is somebody has, I don't know, a hip replacement, a roof repair, and they need some cash. They get a loan to do that, and then while at the provider says, oh, don't you want to have a bit more every month? And then they combine maybe a lump sum with a regular income stream or a line of credit.
I see, because when you frame it as a retirement, it's a really neat option because it basically replaces your typical labor income payments. Is that the typical take-up in the government program?
So the government program, they're very elusive as well about how people do this. But the most common use is the regular payments, because the lump sums were also introduced only very recently. And when you take a lump sum, it reduces your regular payments. And so that it's usually used as an income product in the government scheme.
Sorry, so follow up on that. So when you do get these payments regularly, would that increase your taxable income and therefore decrease your eligibility for social security payments?
If you spend them straight away, no. If it starts becoming an asset sitting in your bank account, yes. So,
Yeah, the same question about social insurance means that's a social program.
So yes, so if you have 90 days to spend it, and if you spend it within 90 days, it doesn't count towards the asset or the income test.
So the government subsidizes a program that saves money if people don't spend it in the 90 days by spending less on social safety nets.
Yes.
Sorry, is there a third column which is just a normal home equity line of credit that you would have in the US, which you can tap when you want?
But not if you're over 60 and you have no income. So it's
very.
very.
Shut it down? The bank shuts it down.
So if you are if I want to get a loan from a bank, and they will ask me to make repayments, right? If I don't want to make it. So these options are if you don't want to make repayments. And if you want to have a normal mortgage, they want you to pay it down over 30 years. And if you don't have other income sources, how can you prove? So you need to show income pay slips, right? How can you pay down?
I think here, so my only issue, here, like my mom is 70, no more job, she still has her home equity line of credit. Like the bank doesn't close it.
Yes.
It's very flexible.
So
It's interest only.
She keeps her existing mortgage. Yes. And so more and more Australians retire with mortgage debt, and they.
But even if you paid off the mortgage,
it's hard to get a new mortgage as an older person without a regular income. But if you have your existing mortgage, it can be a strategy to keep it open. Yes. So that could be a third one, right? A third column. All right. So you can develop a life cycle models, and so there's a literature where people have basically done life cycle modeling around reverse mortgage use, and there's a lot of papers, and you have to tweak the model a lot to not make a reverse mortgage attractive. So in a plain vanilla life cycle model, a reverse mortgage should give some positive welfare gains to older homeowners, especially if they have lots of assets and low income. And those stylized life cycle models predict a higher demand for individuals, especially like in these cases when they're asset rich and income poor, and if their bequest models aren't very strong. So you have to put in a very strong bequest model to make a reverse mortgage unattractive, which we can debate about if that's real or capturing a lot of behavioral factors that a life cycle model can't address. So but take-up of reverse mortgages is very low internationally. So reverse mortgages exist in many, many markets, but across the world, take-up is not very high. So there's another literature that does surveys on individuals in different countries, and they ask about why you're not more interested in this product, or they look at individuals' characteristics and they try to find out what is it that prevents people from taking up reverse mortgages. And some factors come out of this literature: low product awareness, and more importantly, lack of understanding. So many people kind of have heard about it, but they don't really understand it, and they don't really, they misinterpret the product features, and they see risks that maybe aren't there. There's many people think they can be evicted from the home, even though they can't, usually often, or in Australia they can't. People perceive these products as high cost. In some countries they are costly. There is debt aversion. There's a mixed literature on bequest motives in here, and I can talk more about it if there's interest in this. And expectations around bequeathing the home to the next generation. So what we first, to establish basically to set a foundation for our research, what we first did, we developed a vitality model for retirees in Australia that takes into account typical social security or age pensions means test. We have occupational mandatory retirement savings superannuation. We generate economic scenarios, mortality scenarios, and we model a typical reverse mortgage. And we calibrate the model to Australian households in different wealth quartiles based on a national representative survey called the Household Income and Labour Dynamics in Australia survey. And then we use a expected utility framework with and without bequest motives to evaluate the welfare gains. In terms of economic scenarios, we use a economics,
Yeah, just a question about the utility functions.
Yeah.
You say overconsumption. Do you have only here non-durable consumption, or do you also kind of transfer the housing services into a durable consumption stream that then also enters the utility function?
so this utility function is just overconsumption because we do not model the choice of selling and moving. So if we work on modeling downsizing as an option, we would model this, but because our agent is in her home, in any scenario, we do not need to compare this. So we use an economic scenario generator that is similar to the Wilkie model that many people in actuarial studies use to generate economic variables. So it's a model calibrated to Australian economic and financial data. It has a cascade style modeling. You model price inflation, and then wage inflation, long-term interest rates, and so on depend on these, and they all have stochastic relationships, and they generate future scenarios of these key variables, where the returns and the standard deviations are relatively close to the historic averages. So this model is estimated and calibrated over a 30-year horizon, which captures a lot of high interest periods similar to what we currently have. So these are the results. So what we compare is we compare Australian households in 4 wealth quartiles, and these quartiles are based on total wealth. And in each quartile, we estimate what kind of wealth these households have. How much do they have in housing, in their private pension accounts, and in other financial assets. And we use these as inputs into our very comprehensive simulation model, where we do means testing and we just subtract taxes, and we accumulate the assets based on a typical asset allocation of the pension fund. And then we basically compare these households with and without reverse mortgage. And for the reverse mortgage case, we compare different percentages of borrowing against your home every year. So we assume that every year, for example here, they take 2%, they borrow 2% of their housing loans every year until they reach the limit of the borrowing limit of how much they can reach. And we compare the equivalent gain as converting the expected utility into a dollar amount for these different households. And what we find is that in all the households in different wealth quartiles, they have positive gains from using a reverse mortgage, except the lowest households when they borrow more than 7% per year, because lower in the households in the lowest wealth quartile, they cannot borrow much because the housing wealth isn't so high anyway. They will accumulate the higher reverse mortgage interest rates. They don't have many other assets to offset those, and for them, at some point there is a trade-off between the bequest and the consumption now, but for a lower amount of borrowing, they can still experience further gains. This is borrowing at 77, and so waiting until you've used some of your assets and relied on the government pension until you take out a reverse mortgage. And so, consistent with previous studies, we find that in the Australian setting, a reverse mortgage could give well gains to consumers. So, but knowing that so few Australians take up these products, we then launched a survey to understand of Australian homeowners to test whether we can detect and overcome some behavioral biases here. And so what we do, we work with a consumer panel. This is a company called Pure Copper. Australians have signed up for this to do surveys per month for some payment. And sometimes they get asked, do you like this sports shoe? Do you like this name for the car brand? And sometimes they say, here is this research study you want to participate in. So we pay them based on, we pay them a participation fee, about $10, and some bonus based on a quiz about the product. We sampled homeowners aged 60 to 80 in urban and regional areas, male and female, and we put them into 5 random treatment groups. So after some screening, we put our main treatment at the beginning of our survey before we collect a lot of covariates at the end. The survey has about 100 variables. So we have 5 groups, and in the treatment group 0, they saw a description of a reverse mortgage product straight up. And then they had to do a task about this product with indicating the demand for the potential demand for this product. So this is the most simple. Our reference group, which we would use a lot in our analysis, is treatment group 1. They saw the product description and a case study to understand the product a bit better. And then we start to play around with some behavioral aspects. One is there could be mental accounting issues. So group 2 saw a treatment, an information treatment to overcome this mental accounting. Group 3 was treated for broad bracketing, and group 4 had all of these treatments. And so later we can compare whether these treatments had an effect on demand. So why mental accounting? So mental accounting is a concept well known in economics and finance. Standard life cycle theory says that all wealth should be the same, it's fungible. In practice, we know this isn't happening. Sheffer and Tyler, they developed this behavioral life cycle model where they said people probably put their wealth into 3 mental accounts. One is something current income you can spend, current assets maybe only spend if needed, and future income don't touch. And so this model serves as the basis for empirical studies. So a nice figure by Levin looked at, okay, what if different assets change in value? How do people adjust their consumption? And they found that consistent with this behavioral life cycle model, consumption changes when income and liquid assets change, but not if other types of assets such as housing, social security change. And similar effects have been found in different countries, for example, in China. So we think this could be an explanation to reverse mortgage low demand, and to test whether we can overcome this, we developed the following presentation format as part of our survey, where we showed people the following screen. We said below are some assets and income sources and which can use to cover their expenditures in retirement. And we asked them, we didn't just show it to them, we asked them to reflect on it. We said, like, okay, which of these do you have? And all of them were homeowners, so they should all click my home. And if they didn't, we remind them, you own a home and it can be part of your sources to fund retirement, and then other assets. And then after this, they click the assets, and then we said, okay, just to summarize, you can use to fund your retirement, including your home. Narrow broad marketing, you're probably already familiar with this, is about considering all the consequences of your choices and considering your financial choices together. So, Reed and I, with David Laxton as a co-author, they have this nice paper about broad bracketing and narrow bracketing, and then Jeff Brown has adopted it to annuity demand. And for example, for annuity demand, if you frame an annuity broadly in a consumption frame, this can give you an income for life. Demand is much higher, instead of just saying, okay, annuity is a really, in effect, it's a product you pay now, you lose a lot of money, and maybe you get a return when you live long. So if you put it in an investment frame, just around risk and return, the demand for annuity is lower. And then they followed up by, if you make people, the moment they have to make the annuity decision, make them think about spending in retirement, it also impacts annuity demand. And so inspired by this, we developed a treatment where we wanted to make people aware of how much they could have to spend in retirement. So we said, here's a list of expenditures people make in retirement, and we asked them to consider, is it easy, difficult, or not relevant, easy or difficult for them to cover or not relevant. So the point of this exercise was make people aware of how costly it can be to be in retirement. So when you talk to people when they plan their retirement, you talk to them about how much they need. They just consider their grocery bills. Most people just think about their weekend shop in the supermarket. But if you say, actually, you may have to renovate your home, you have to pay for health insurance, aged care, you have holiday and travel, it becomes a more comprehensive view on their expenditure and the need for maybe additional funding. And then we have a case, the product description. We describe a very standard reverse mortgage, but we don't call it a reverse mortgage, we call it equity release product A, because people may have some bias against a reverse mortgage, or they may think they know how it works, so we just call it a equity release product A, and it has the typical features. You don't have to make repayments, you can stay in the home as long as you want, and so on. And then we showed them a case study about Judy and Michael, who are 70, and for those people which had the mental accounting treatment, we have a sentence in there to say, Judy and Michael, they can rely on their home. It's okay. It's okay for Judy and Michael, it's okay for you to use your home to retirement financing. And then for those people who have had the broad bracketing treatment, in the case study, we list all the things that Judy and Michael want to pay for to really reinforce this message of when you think about a reverse mortgage, maybe you need to think about all the costs you want to cover in the lifestyle you want to have. And then came the task, and we said, well, please read this carefully. Here's the product that we described to you earlier. You can borrow up to, and 40% was of their reported home value, and then they used a slider to report, and the slider initially was set at 0, but they had to move it once. I give you the example of somebody who chooses the maximum to show you that the outcome table shows numbers that based on the choice, so they could play around with it and they could move it back to 0. But they had, so it started at 0, they had to move it once and they could move to 0. So who's our sample? This is ours. It was 60 to 80, 48% female, so on. We compare the characteristics with a similar sample with the same sample criteria in the nationally representative Hilda survey, and the characteristics are quite similar. We have a bit less female and a bit lower housing value, but the differences are not very much. So we decided to keep the sample without adjustment. So first, we wanted to see whether having a case study improves the understanding of our reverse mortgage product, and what we find is that those people who saw the case study had a higher self-reported understanding of the product, which was rated on a 6-point scale of how do you rate your understanding. So we said those people that were in the treatment groups with the case study, they had a higher understanding of the product, some perceived understanding, but they also scored better on a product quiz. So after the whole thing, they took a quiz and they were significantly better. Now, in terms of how much they borrowed, we look at two measures of reverse mortgage demand. One is whether they would take out the reverse mortgage at all. The intensive margin, and we find that that was very similar across the 5 groups. So there wasn't a significant difference based on treatment. Then we looked at how conditional on borrowing, how much would they borrow against the home, was the maximum being 40%. And we found that those in treatment group 2, which saw the mental accounting treatment, would borrow significantly more than those in the treatment group 1 that didn't have any behavior treatments. We wanted to test whether the case study effect was significant. So we first predicted, we did a 2-stage estimation where we used the group we were allocated into as an instrument, predicting good understanding, measured as having 6 correct questions in the quiz of 6. And we find that being shown the case study increases understanding in the first stage. But in the second stage, it didn't lead to reverse mortgage demand. So people understood the product better, but that didn't mean they want more of it. There was some that wanted more and some that wanted less. But we think that's a good outcome because at least they knew more about it. Then, in terms of did the behavioral interventions that we designed improve anything about reverse mortgage demand? Did they impact reverse mortgage demand? So consistent with the descriptive stats that I showed you earlier, we find, so we had a mental accounting treatment, a broad bracketing, and people that saw both. And in terms of the whether they would take up the product, yes or no, there was no significant effect. So what we showed them, there was no difference. But for those conditional borrowing, the effect of seeing the mental accounting treatment significantly increased the demand, consistent with the descriptive stats. We also, because we collected a lot of covariates, we can see a lot of other factors that affected the demand for reverse mortgages. And these are variables identified in previous studies on reverse mortgages and other retirement financial products. And I'm listing here those that are significant. And for taking out the product at all, the extensive margin, demographics were important, household finances, preferences, but no treatment effect of behavioral factors, but conditioned on taking out the product. As I said, mental accounting was induced higher demand, and mental accounting treatment design, and again, household finances, demographic variables. So, in conclusion, the simulation results for our model based in the Australian institutional context, showed that reverse mortgages can improve retirees' financial well-being. We then conducted a survey to dig into the factors why individuals may or may not like reverse mortgages, and we introduced two new aspects that haven't been studied in the reverse mortgage context: mental accounting and broad bracketing. We tested for product complexity by having a group with and without case study. We found the case study is important for product understanding, but not for demand. And for the extensive margin, economic factors were important, and in the intensive margin, we found some effects of mental accounting. So, does it mean behavior factors don't play a role? It only means that the treatments we designed, the information ways we designed, maybe the broad bracketing, the list of retirement expenditures, that didn't seem to have an effect. So we can't prove whether or not the underlying behavioral effect is there. We can only comment on the designs we designed and how they worked. But what we can say is, based on our results, is that positive, that clear product descriptions and case studies are very important. And many providers do this. They have consumer testimonials, they have short videos of people like you who did this product, and that seems to work for understanding. And based on our results on mental accounting, we would say that emphasizing this positive message that housing wealth can be used to support retirement can help. And I think that's what also is coming out in Australia through the government program. So the Australian government saying this is a program that we're offering, it's sending a signal to Australian retirees that this is an okay way to fund your retirement. And so yeah, we look forward to your comment. Thank you.
So firstly, thank you very much for the invitation. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And thank you for giving me this paper, which when Philippe said to me, he said, this is really a fun paper. And I want to start by referring to the very representative New York Times, where social questions column said, my parents have got lots of land, why aren't they selling it? They're asking me for money during their retirement to fund their holidays. See, people have read that column. And I would rather they sell their land and spend their own money rather than give me this bequest. If only there was a product to help with this. But there is, in lots of countries, and people do not use it. So this is a really big problem. So the first thing I want to say about this paper is it's very relevant, it's very high impact. Next up, why do the elderly save so much? And so the general thing is, we've got our models, they suggest you can have this hump-shaped life cycle, you're going to save down, and we've had a long problem for a long time saying, why aren't people doing this? We came up broadly with two things, which were bequest desires and medical expenditure risk, and said, okay, if we add these in enough sort of strength, we end up with matching the profile of wealth over the life cycle. But this approach also captures the thing that I think you're really identifying and trying to work very hard on and very seriously, which is it's also something to do with liquidity of wealth, either on a mental level or on a physical level. And we're capturing that in those things that we're identifying as bequest generally or medical risk. And of course, Pierre Carl's done a lot of work on trying to separate those things. It's very hard. But this paper is very good. It goes out, it asks people, and it tries to figure it out. So the colloquial question is, you have this very valuable thing, why don't you get the money out of it? Why are you sitting on it? And I think the way that it does this is very neat because you have several stages, which I'll go through as I'm going to get out my inner Eric French and go through the way that this works in the paper. But essentially, why is there low reverse mortgage use? Well, number one, you don't want it, or your finances don't mean you don't need it. And in fact, the information treatments show, I don't need this product. And in fact, I get better at knowing that. Intensively, behavioral does have a key effect when you kind of put them together, which is I need to consider my whole portfolio, number one. and I need to consider the consequences, and I need to do that together. But it seems to sit more on the intensive side than the extensive side. Now, literature, what I want to say here is I think it fits especially well with Pierre Carr's paper. I'd also say it fits in generally the more recent paper by Kathleen McKeon, the really nice one that does the US social security system and finds out when you want to retire and what kind of risk you take by retiring. But that aside, I'll move on quickly to say, I like to think of this paper as a mystery novel. So it's an Agatha Christie situation where you've got a crime, you need means, you need motive, and you need opportunity, right? If you're going to be a detective. And the way this paper does this is like that. It says, well, is the product out there? Do people know about it? Is it around? It seems to be. I've got a check mark there. It's well established. It's supported by the government. It's supported by regulations. I actually signed up and tried to get one, and I actually got pretty far through the process using this information. It's easy. There are 101 newspaper articles on it, and in fact a lot of them cite you and your institution, and the same sort of think tanks on this. So it's definitely there, people definitely know about it. And then you say, well, would people actually gain from it? Because if they're not using it, maybe they just don't gain from it. But we're going to do a structural model, we're going to keep it clean, we're going to keep it simple, and we're going to find out that yes, there is a group, a very logical group, who would benefit. So that's going to be our motive there. And then lastly, you've kind of got the opportunity, which is survey with information treatments. Like, we're going to give you something that's going to kind of improve your opportunity here. And you do find that these seem to increase intensive demand in the group we would expect, this high wealth, low income group. And that makes a lot of sense. And the fact that this particular group, what these information treatments do is they really isolate this group as the ones who benefit from these information treatments. Now, the means, I could go through this very quickly because you gave us a lot of nice detail, but what I would point out is one really key thing is these are high rates, 9%. You can, again, I applied for a normal mortgage in Australia too when I was doing my little bit of research, and I could get something for less than 5, but I'm getting 9 here because they, the banks don't like this no negative without NEG guarantee to save me saying all those words, and they don't like the idea that they have this kind of time problem as well. So there are very high rates on this product in general, but they're out there and there is competition. So what I want to say about the motive part of it, the model part, is firstly you do excellent institutional income modeling. It's very clear. I have no comments about that because I think it's pretty much dead on. Like, they know the income system, they know how the superannuation works, so I won't go through a lot of jargon. The way Marie-Christine said a discussant should always be able to summarize the model on one slide in a single set of equations. So I tried to do that, and it's not quite a model, but what it really says is you're going to have a consumption floor. You need to spend this much money to live as a retiree, and then otherwise you're going to kind of spend all your income. And we're going to do that as sort of a motivating assumption where we know this isn't completely true, of course, but it's going to simplify a lot of our problems because in some senses it doesn't really matter if you don't quite spend all your income or not. The whole point here is that some people are going to want to extract from their wealth, and that's what you're focusing on. So I really like the kind of the laser focus that your model has. There's not a lot of extraneous detail. So what's the choice variable here, really? Well, it's whether to get this reverse mortgage. And rather than worry a lot about exactly the intensity, what you do is by giving lots of options and checking lots of options, you do robustness through that, rather than specifying a very, very complex utility situation. And that, I think, is very neat, because it keeps us on the key problem. So you've got a choice over one thing, it's whether to get the reverse mortgage, which really leads to a 2-period problem, where if you raise your income, which is more or less your spending in this setup, you reduce your bequest. And your bequest is therefore your residual, which is stopping you from maybe taking this product. Now, when do you win from it? Well, I've kind of gone through that already, but there are some other subtleties, like whether you have good or bad investment options that gives you different kind of returns. And I think one thing you need to be careful of is different bequest desires, and this is something that Rory will say he ran into with his paper. referees were very key on, are there different levels of bequest desire among different groups? How can we identify those groups? I think that might be really important. I'd also question, and I don't want to kind of go deeply into it, but is a reverse mortgage actually risk-free for a household? Or what risks are we doing here? Because there's a degree to which, once you take it out, you're kind of stuck with it. And that's sort of an issue. This isn't like the Canadian context where it's very, very, you take some money out, you put some money back, it's whatever you like to do. And you've got some exposures here, and I think there's an important pseudo-arbitrage here with the mortgage product, which I'll come to in a bit. There's also this idea, and Dan Barchett, I think, summarized it really well, which is, potentially, if you have a house, your children can't get it till you die, but other money, maybe they can kind of get their hands on. It's sort of an incentive for you to keep looking after them in their old age. It's an insurance device. Now you can put that down to bequest desire, I think. I think that's quite reasonable. I just wanted to raise it because I find it amusing more than anything else. Evaluating this model, I think when I came to this, my first question is what I call the Victoria's Rule question, which is, I would like to see the lines from the model that depict the wealth through retirement, just to see that this model is kind of predicting what people do on a general level. You know, you have the Hilda framework, it's got many different cohorts, so you can control for cohort. I think that is actually important, even though the product usage is changing over that time. I also think you can invert the question. What would the bequest preference have to be to generate the current reverse mortgage demand? And I think your framework can do that. And that's sort of pushing it to the other side of, how much do I have to like other things to hate this product? And that's how I might frame it there. So there's an illiteracy wedge, potentially, that you can be dealing with it or framing it that way. Now, I'd also say how do retirees consume? And I'm going to skip forward. Oh, sorry. So my point one, this is what I would say is the riddle of mysterious Nordic accumulation, which you see across Scandinavia, of wealth goes up even in retirement. And it goes up regardless of how I cut it, regardless of asset. Financial wealth is going up, housing wealth is going up. So the amount of people who make this wealth might be quite small. I'd also say, my point two, how do retirees consume? I went to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and I know they do have a survey. I couldn't get the micro data quickly enough, but I could see that in general expenditures were below incomes for people in that age group. So there are clearly a lot of people still saving. And so that's where, if I turn to Canada, and I'm sorry the dots are a little bit small, I did not think that through very well. But if I just have that black line at 1, which is my expenditure compared to my income, you can see it's roughly the 60, 70th percentile. But what's supportive of your story is there does seem to be something like a consumption floor because of that kind of upward slope towards the very low income. This is income deciles going across. The very low income people, it seems to be there's a consumption floor. I think a graph like this, probably much better than this, would really justify your modelling assumptions. Now, my last point, product arbitrage. Your people have produced a report that's very cited across the Australian media, and that report said a lot of households are retiring with extensive mortgages. So there's clearly some kind of product arbitrage going on. I think your model actually could be of keeping these mortgages instead and then seeing whether a reverse mortgage is better for that household. That might be a good way to do it. And I think basically, I don't want to call out Kierkegaard too often, but I think that's the way that he does it is very similar there. I think moving house, a bit too complex maybe, but definitely with regards to thinking about the normal mortgage in this context. Now, I've probably run out of time, but I will, not a problem. So what I'll say is, we've been through the survey. The key point is whether they learn housing can fund their retirement and whether they think carefully about what they're going to need to fund in their retirement via their expenditures. And the thing is, it seems very strange with the noise signal ratio that you've got going on here. So you're giving people this information, and then some people are changing what they go for. Now, I think you can be more explicit to use your model to score the gains from the reverse mortgage and then line those people up. And by doing that, I think you can see whether people are kind of converging to the rational outcome rather than what you're doing right now, which is comparing the means, essentially. And that would maybe get you through that point you say in the paper where you say we can't identify this. Well, I think you can actually. I think you with your model, you have the framework to do that. And there's been some like experimental economics about people converging to sort of Bayesian updating or not. And then you can maybe look about whether the information actually reduces the residual or the variation within specific groups. Are people like going to one outcome and all choosing the same, or are they changing their beliefs? Now, with my remaining time, because I've gone massively over, because I'm quite excited by this paper, I think one of the things that's really left me as a puzzle is that point 4 there, which is when you have both these treatments together, you get much higher demand. When you give them individual treatments, you get lower demand. What's going on here? It seems like if you tell people mental accounting, they go, oh, hey, I've actually got more wealth than I thought, so they don't want the product as much. You tell them broad bracketing, hey, you need lots of expenditures. Well, maybe it's just that they actually realise they don't need as much expenditure as they thought when they think deeply. I'm not quite sure there. You put the two things together, it seems like then you isolate this group who need the product, who then identify the product. So that makes a lot of sense to me. But it's still, it's hard to explain. And I found that it took me a while to read. So in my conclusion, I would say it's very clean and robust. I think we could benefit from more of a proof of fit, essentially, for the model, rather than just being very robust about the gains. And then I think it's a very interesting puzzle about how information is presented and received, because the combined treatment's effective. And it's also reasonable that the good controls in this paper mean that you're showing smaller effects from the information. You've got a lot of details about these people. I wonder whether these information treatments are changing other choices they're sort of making in their heads when they're thinking about this reverse mortgage. And that is something I'll leave there. And it is genuinely a fun paper to read. Like I said, it's a mystery novel. So thanks very much.
Thank you for all your time. This was fun to listen to and very constructive. So I thank you for how much you invested in this. I won't debunk it because it's very nice. It's true that more. Yeah. So what the biggest segment of new reverse mortgage demand in Australia is refinancing more existing mortgages into reverse mortgages. So I should have discussed it a bit more on my slide, but what happens is Australians retire with more mortgage debt, and then the bank tells them you have to make repayments, and they don't want to make these repayments. So when we look at the use of reverse mortgages reported by the biggest lender, debt consolidation is a very large aspect. So what you're saying is very true. That it is a segment of reverse mortgage use. And yeah, so thank you for all the literature references as well. So I want to take my time to see more questions from you, because I think Thomas and I will maybe chat later about this. So, but does anybody else have comments or questions?
Sure. So the question I have is, what happens to the debt when the homeowner dies? Does it get transferred to their children?
It's settled. So when the homeowner dies, or the last homeowner, the contract ends and the home is sold and the debt is settled. And it's settled from the sale proceeds. So
then the home can still be part of the bequest model.
Because the residual after the loan is settled goes to the estate. So from household point of view, the non-negative equity guarantee protects you against decreases in the home value, but if the home increases a lot, there's a chance, if you didn't have a big reverse mortgage, or that there's money left that goes to the estate.
The reason I ask is big picture. This policy is one that we think could encourage more of this, but should we also think about the problem of people staying in their homes instead of downsizing and moving out and increasing the supply of housing in that sense?
So So I am part of a large interdisciplinary center on aging, and I listen to a lot of what my colleagues say about healthy aging and successful aging, and community is such an important part for outcomes in retirement. And I've become very careful about these statements because it's for us. I mean, I also do research on dementia, and social connectedness is a really preventative factor. So I think it's hard to tell somebody if they're already they have to move, and often it's hard to find in their community smaller accumulation. So it's not an easy thing to say, and it's not clear that the houses that these homeowners own are the houses that young family want. So, in Australia, now we have a bedroom to bathroom ratio of 1, so each family needs their bathroom. Lots of these older houses have 5 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. So it's not clear that this is. So I think we need to be a bit careful about these statements that older people are, I don't know, taking up housing space. And it's also very, very important to be in your community and maintain social networks as you get older for many health outcomes.
I was going to ask the same question about what happens when someone dies, what happens?
So what is, so I know a lot of reverse mortgage providers in Australia, and every quarter also somebody comes to me with a great new idea for one of those products, and half of them never come back. And so I feel, so yeah, there is different approaches. Some people want to buy houses from older people and rent them back to them, but the reverse mortgage seems to be the main business model, and what the providers are facing is prepayment. So this has come to me first as a review of actuarial papers, where the actuarial colleagues say, modeling reverse mortgage is so much fun. The house prices, the interest rates, the prepayment, the health risk actuaries get really passionate about the modeling, and then they started to do prepayment risk. And what's happening is people take on a reverse mortgage. They see that it's accumulating, and it increases their readiness to move on or settle the debt. So you can also prepay a reverse mortgage, and so the typical duration of reverse mortgage in Australia is, I think, 7 years. So which is a challenge to the profitability of these products from the provider's perspective. So you can also prepay the loan, or you can sell and pay. So not all of them actually go to the end of life.
Any question about your survey work? Did you ask some qualitative or open-ended questions? Why do people say they don't want this product?
So we have some questions about why, and one of the factors came out as significant, and it is this is the perceived attractiveness of the product. So it was a drop-down menu, and they could click any of the choices, and we had a lot of so we had something about that they didn't want to be in that, and they were very clear about I paid off my mortgage and I'm so proud I did it. I don't want to go back into that. But then there was this. I just think this is a bad deal. I still think this is a bad deal. So their understanding was good, but they just see the product as unattractive. And so yeah, we had a drop-down menu that they could also write about.
Katja,
Yes.
has there been any work on or in the industry product, let's say, so for people who have an existing mortgage, it seems like you can just repackage that existing mortgage, right? Backload the payments and kind of people not make payments in the first few years. That kind of replicates a little bit the cash flow of a reverse mortgage, and then you could add a non-negative equity guarantee at the end. But
Yeah.
so has there been any? Is that you talked at some point about new innovations with existing mortgages?
Yes.
Has this been discussed? This idea of
So the latest product that launched is a secondary mortgage, and it's so you have a mortgage, but you take out a second mortgage, which you don't have to repay, but it gives you, and it accumulates and pays out at the end. and the reverse mortgage providers don't like it because it's midlife. So it's and what happens if they can't repay? Then they have to move. And
Right.
But I don't. So
I'm
Australia.
just trying to think of framing, like a
Yes.
positive framing of saying to someone,
Mm,
you know, in the end, they're purchasing a reverse mortgage, but all you're telling them is, you're not gonna have to make payments now for the next 5 years on your current mortgage.
yes.
And obviously, we're gonna backload what's gonna happen in the end, but effectively,
I don't know. I have this friend who is a visionary, and he founded this company, and they're now the second largest lender in Australia, Household Capital, and he's a fascinating guy, but he doesn't like to call it a reverse mortgage.
Yeah.
So, Household Capital, and he goes around and this is equity release, and he calls it something. And whenever I'm in the room, I say it is a reverse mortgage. If you're
Yes,
regulated as a
exactly,
reverse
exactly.
mortgage, you are a reverse mortgage,
Yeah.
and he doesn't like it. But I think we need to call it what it is. So I
Yeah.
don't like this language of not calling it what it is.
okay, thank you.
Good.
Well, thank you so much.